Hindu astrology, also known as Vedic astrology, is important to those of the Hindu faith worldwide. Astrology is literally translated as the study of the stars, and it is based on the person's birth time, location, and the related placement of the planets at that time. Many Hindu families name their child or children based on what his or her chart says about them. Not only is the Vedic chart referred to for decision-making about marriage and moving, but it is also read to review health problems one may face, when one should open a business, and thought to tell how many children one will have. James Braha, author of 6 books on the matter, goes into further discussion of the Vedic astrology in this second and final installment of AIB Presents Hindu Astrology.
I'm Cathy Burroughs. I'm a practicing astrologer. I've been practicing astrology for more than 30 years and a professional. And I started exploring astrology when I wanted to understand my life, my path, my purpose. And 20 years ago, I was fortunate enough to take a workshop in Baltimore with one of the preeminent astrologers in the world, who uses a whole nother system of astrology than I had ever studied about. And that is Vedic or Hindu astrology. And that is James Braha. And recently we reconnected, and we had the opportunity for him to come to Atlanta, not just for 1 or 2 days, but for almost an entire week of immersion. And it is such a rich experience to hear him do lectures, workshops, even perform his music and sing. And we've been very fortunate to have a wide array of sponsors to make this possible. I'm very, very excited this opportunity for me to actually have a personal immersion and reading with the master, James Braha, today, to find out about my destiny, soul purpose, as well as money, fame, and lots of other good information that I think will be of interest to you. And I'm excited to hear how it contrasts with my Western chart. So thank you so much for being here, James. We're very excited about this opportunity, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I know you live in Sarasota, Florida, and people may wonder, what does an astrologer do? How do you while away your time day to day?
Well, I do I do chart readings. I do horoscope readings, tell people about their lives. Most people come to me for the Hindu system, but I actually use Hindu and Western astrology. And the systems are different. The Western astrology uses the tropical zodiac, which is kind of based on the equinox, the spring equinox, whereas Hindu astrology is actually based on the star clusters. Let me explain this. A long time ago, when they were figuring horoscopes, when they were figuring the zodiac, they took they looked in the sky and they made like a 360-degree circle. And they said, let's call that cluster of stars Aries, okay? And everybody knew that if you had the sun in that area, it was the sun in Aries or the moon in Aries. But every 72 years, there is the precession of the equinox, so that 72 years later, the point they called 0 Aries was now 29 Pisces. So Westerners don't bother concerning themselves about the precession. The Indians do. So after, by the year 2015, the zodiac has to be backed up about 24 degrees. So the zodiacs are different. So your Western chart, like in your case, Cathy, you have a Cancer ascendant in the Western chart, 22 degrees. And in the Hindu chart, it's a 29-degree Gemini ascendant. So everything is backed up about 22, 23, 24 degrees, depending upon when you're born. And so you get a different zodiac, but it's not just a different zodiac. It's the fact that the Western astrology is more really about like your sun sign, your psychology. If the sun is in Libra, then my sun's in Libra, so I'm very relationship oriented. Somebody's sun is in Aries, they're more self-oriented. Capricorn has a goal. So that's a more psychological thing. The Hindu system is not like that. It's more about, you go to an astrologer, I want to know, will I have a happy marriage? How many children will I have? What will my career be? Like when I look at your chart for career, really, it's a it looks like a spiritual career for sure, but it's also very strong for healing. So, and I mean, even medicine, even traditional medicine, but because it's a spiritual chart, when you see the chart of somebody that is a healer, but it's also a very spiritual chart, then they're usually not going to be a doctor. They're usually going to be, a metaphysical healer, or they'll do acupuncture, or they'll do Ayurveda. They'll do non-traditional methods.
Yeah. Well, I'm in addition to being an astrologer, I'm a psychic.
Right.
I'm a multidimensional healer.
Right.
And I also am a medical intuitive.
Right. And you can see that from the chart, and here's why. Your horoscope as a whole in general is extremely spiritual. Now, spiritual means oriented toward enlightenment, final liberation, cutting free of all the suffering which is born of attachment. That's the spiritual side. Your chart is also, and it's spiritual because Jupiter, the planet of luck and fortune, is in the house of enlightenment, and Jupiter rules the career house in your chart, and it's in the house of enlightenment. So the career is connected to spiritual. Okay, the 8th house is also very strong, and the 8th house is metaphysical, which means astrology, psychic phenomenon. But the 6th house is very strong, and the 6th house is health and healing. And in the Hindu system, after we look at the natal chart, we also have what are called Varga charts, or divisional charts. There's a chart for career, there's a chart for marriage, there's a chart for children. Your dasamsha, your natal chart is indicating spiritual career. Your career chart, the separate chart,
in the Hindu,
is called the dasamsha chart in the Hindu, and the ruler of the career house is in the 6th. So you are a healer. The healing figures into this career quite a bit. So now, you also have a very, very strong 9th house, which is higher knowledge. And you actually have what's called a Raja Yoga, a kingly union. What that means, a kingly union, if a person has a Raja Yoga in the Hindu system, that means that they're functioning like a king in this area. So if a person has a Raja Yoga in the 7th house, they function like a king in marriage. Their marriage is great. I have a Raja Yoga in the 5th house. I have a child who is wonderful. Okay? You have a Raja Yoga in the 9th house, which is higher knowledge. So when you go to get higher knowledge, you'll always get it. Higher knowledge will come to you, and that'll be a major interest. So like if you were Indian, your parents would have come to me at birth, and they would say, tell me about her life. I said, well, she's going to do a lot of travel, and she's going to be very oriented toward religion and philosophy, but she's going to have a strong 6th house. She could be a healer, and also her own health, because the 6th house is so strong, you would be able to defeat your enemies and competitors, and when you get health problems, which would be rare, you'd be able to overcome them. Now you have Mars in its own sign, Mars in Scorpio in the 6th house. You know who had that? Fidel Castro. Every time his enemies tried to overcome him, they would lose. Every time. The United States tried over and over and over to defeat this guy. But his 6th house is so strong that he defeats his enemies and competitors. Now, you know what happens if the 6th house is weak? Then you're beset with lawsuits in your life and people hassling you. And so these are the things people come to an astrologer to find out. Whereas in Western astrology, it's a little bit more... if I look at your Western horoscope, the first thing I'm going to say is that your purpose in life, which I'm not going to mention from the Hindu. The Hindu is simply what's going to happen to you, okay? What's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of higher knowledge, you're going to be a healer, you're going to be spiritual, you're going to defeat your enemies, okay? But a Westerner goes to an astrologer and they say, this is what you should do. What you should do is, you have the North Node in Capricorn, you should go toward career. They would say the South Node is in Cancer, the North Node's in Capricorn. So the South Node in Cancer means that in past lifetimes you did a lot of activity with home and family. Now, home and family is fine. You can have a home and family, but there's no point in focusing a lot on that, because what you need to develop is the career and the public. That doesn't say anything about what's going to happen to you. It's your choice whether you want to focus on career. But if you do, that's where your happiness and fulfillment will be. Also, the South Node's in the first house, the North Node's right on the 7th house cusp. That means in past lifetimes you did what you wanted to do. Now you're learning compromise.
Sort of.
You're learning compromise. Well, that's your purpose. Well, that's your purpose. Okay. So those are kind of the differences. The Hindu system is more, event-oriented. The Western system is more psychological. Now, the Western chart has certain high points and certain difficulties. Venus is square to Mars in the Western chart. That indicates that if you were in a love relationship, there'd be a certain kind of fighting. And you would have to learn. You would start out in love relationships fighting. Then as you grow older, you'd realize, nobody wins a fight. And hopefully you would figure that out. And you could, and that's how the Western system works. It's a little bit more counseling like. Now the Western system, don't get me wrong, people make spectacular predictions from the Western system too. But I use both systems. To me, the Western system is much better on the psychological and behavioral side than it is on the predictive, and vice versa. The Hindu is better on the predictive.
May I comment for a second?
Sure.
I just want to talk about the Enlightenment. That has been probably the overarching intention in my life. And I'm a practicing Buddhist, and I've been practicing for almost 40 years. And enlightenment and spiritual practice is incredibly important to me. If I'm not doing spiritual practice, I feel my life is not without purpose.
And I'll give you some good news now.
What's that?
Okay, now this is purely speculative, and I'm much more of a practical astrologer, so I don't really get into this, but I want to compliment you. The 12th house has to do with what happens after you die. And you have Jupiter, the great, benefic, lucky, fortunate, sattvic, sattva means purity. So you have the planet of purity in the 12th house, which is enlightenment, and it's also life after death. So according to the Hindus, you would go to Brahmaloka after you die, which would be the highest plane of existence after you die. Now, I don't do it. Now, if people come to me and say, where am I going after I die? It's purely speculative. But that's the one that I always remember, because it's quite nice.
That's nice, but what about this life?
Well, speaking
what about
of
this incarnation?
Speaking of this life, we talked about this before this interview, and you said it was okay to mention this.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, a couple of years ago, in February 2013, you entered a moon dasha, a moon period. In the Hindu system, we have these dashas and bhuktis, periods and subperiods. Everybody goes through a certain number of these periods. The sun is 6 years, the Venus period is 20 years, Saturn is 19 years, and it depends on when you're born as to which period you start with. After that, they go in order. And you've had some good periods, and now you're having a difficult period. The period you're in now is the moon. Now, it doesn't mean everybody has a bad moon period. Moon could be very good. But in your horoscope, the moon is aspected by two malefics. It's aspected by Ketu, the South Node, and it's aspected by Saturn. And the Saturn aspect is a particularly difficult one because it's aspecting the moon in Cancer. What does it mean? When you come to the moon period, because the moon is in the house of money, these 10 years will be more difficult on the financial side.
But what about, for example, if I'm thinking of selling a house, is this a good time or not a good time?
When is a good time to sell? First of all, the whole moon dasha is not a very favorable time for anything financial. But if you have to sell your house, you sell it when Jupiter transits the 4th house, which would be between July 2016 and July 2017. Between July of 2015 and July of 2016, Jupiter will transit your 3rd house. Your energy will increase. Your luck with neighbors will increase. Your ability to fulfill your desires. If you want to study computers, it's great for machinery, but you'll be able to fulfill your desires. You'll have more energy in that year. The following year, Jupiter will go into the 4th house, and then you'll have 1 year to buy and sell real estate when luck is with you. Now, there could also be a sub-period within the dashas. So the moon dasha goes like this: moon, moon, maybe for 6 months, moon, Mars for 8 months, moon, Rahu for a year, moon, Jupiter for a year. So you have all these sub-periods within the moon period. So even though the moon is afflicted and causes money problems, some of the sub-periods could be strong and they would help. But as far as selling, you would look for Mercury, because Mercury rules your 4th house, which is land and real estate. And that would be December 2018 to May 2020. That's another period which is good for real estate. But if you wanted sooner, it would be, July of 2016.
I'm also getting more back into the arts. I have an entertainment business. Do you see anything like that?
That's going to be really good from July of this year to July of 2016, because Jupiter, in the Hindu system, the houses of the chart, we have all 12 houses, and most of the houses are the same. In a Western chart or a Hindu chart, the first house represents you, how you respond to the world. You have confidence or shyness, how the world responds to you. The second house is money. The third house. Okay, so there are, I would say 80% of the time, the houses are the same, but occasionally they're different. In Western astrology, the 5th house is the arts. And in your Western chart, the arts are strong because you've got Mars in the 5th house aspected by Jupiter, and also because you have Mercury and Venus fairly close. In the Hindu system, it's the 3rd house is the arts, and the 3rd house here is very strong. It's very strong because Sun, Mercury, and Venus are all aspecting the 3rd house, which is the arts. So that's a really good field for you. And Jupiter's going to go into that house. You'll do very well. You'll also travel.
Yeah, I love travel.
That year.
Oh, super.
Yeah.
Now, in last night's workshop, you talked a little bit about past life karma. Does that show up in my chart?
Yes. And before I answer that, let me just say, Hindu astrology is predictive, and we could have predicted from the time of your birth that you'd have money problems in these 10 years. But we would also tell, like we would tell your parents, when she gets to that age, make sure she's wearing a pearl for the moon. Make sure she takes Mondays, the day of the moon, and keeps it as a restful spiritual day, fasting, praying. Yeah. And you could have prayers, chanting mantras.
I actually take Mondays off now, just instinctively.
That's good. That's your psychic ability. So, the Purva Punya, the past life credit. Past life credit is connected to the 5th house, okay? And you have really strong past life credit with higher knowledge. You have what's called mutual reception. In the West, it's called mutual reception. You don't have mutual reception in the West necessarily. I'd have to look. Saturn and Venus. Saturn's in Scorpio. No, you don't have it in the West. But in the Hindu system, you have mutual reception. They call it Parivartana Yoga. The ruler of the 9th house is in the 5th. The ruler of the 5th house is in the 9th. The 9th house is higher knowledge, religion, philosophy. The 5th house is past life credit. So your past life credit is massively connected to higher knowledge and religion and philosophy. When you want higher knowledge and philosophy, you will get it. The karma is also, Saturn also is ruling the 8th house. It's not in mutual reception, but it's ruling the 8th house and it's in the 5th. So the 8th house is astrology and metaphysical subjects. So you should get, in this lifetime, not only religion, philosophy knowledge, but psychic ability, longevity. The 8th house is longevity and psychic ability. So you should have a long life and you should have psychic ability, all because you did something in past lifetimes to make it occur in this lifetime.
Do you see anything about success in the media?
Well, in general or now?
Either or.
Well, the moon period is a difficult period, we said already. The moon is near Ketu, and it's aspected by Saturn. Saturn is restriction, delays, and problems, but Saturn is also austerity, meditation, fasting, austerity. So in the moon period, instead of looking for fame and recognition, it's inward. It's a more inward period.
Yes.
Moon is also near Ketu, which is the south node in Western astrology, and Ketu represents everything that is inner and psychic and metaphysical and shy and introverted. So if you wanted to use the moon period to its best effect, you would go inward into meditation, spiritual practice. Otherwise, you can go out into the world, but you'll be beating your head against the wall a little bit.
Because the energy doesn't support it.
Doesn't support it.
So if someone was to come to you for a reading, can you talk us through the process of how you prepare and what you look at and what the average person, if they were coming for a reading with you, what they might hope to learn?
Well, they would be asking you. They'd be asking about health, and I would say, "Wow, your health is really strong. Don't worry about that. That's a good area."
And we do have great longevity in the family, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. When I went to Iceland, there's certain patterns that you see in different countries. When I go to Switzerland, all the charts look like the people are wealthy. When I go to Iceland, the 8th house is massively strong. And these people, they live to 95, 100.
8th house associated with longevity.
Yes, yes. And then you come to America and everybody's got marriage problems. There's certain patterns.
Cultural karma.
Cultural patterns, yeah.
Collective karma.
Yeah, yeah. So, so the person would want to know about health. Well, I would say, well, health is good. Now, even though health is good and strong, everybody has to die of something. So you have the moon is vulnerable because it's afflicted, and Jupiter is afflicted because it's in the 12th house and aspected by Mars. So Jupiter is the liver, gallbladder, spleen, allergies.
I have a fatty liver and I have allergies.
Well, that's the Jupiter affliction. So you would I would say wear a yellow sapphire. And I would say fast and don't eat fatty foods. That's what I would be talking about. How to make sure that your liver doesn't,
to offset that.
Right. Yeah. And then I would say with the moon affliction, breast exams are very important. The breast and the stomach is ruled by the moon.
I've got stomach issues.
So that's
Digestive
the moon. Then you would ask about career. The person wants to know about career. I said, well, the ruler of the career house is in the 12th. In the Hindu system, the 6th, 8th, and 12th house are dashtanas, grief-producing houses. So the career is going to be problematic. Confusion about career, or you don't get the full results of your career unless you do a 12th house career. So I would tell the person, first of all, I'd say, have you noticed that you've had confusion in career, problems in career? They go, yes. You work really hard and someone else gets the credit? Yes. What you do is to fix that, because the 12th house is problems and debts. It means you did something bad in the career and now it comes back. But the 12th house is enlightenment. So if you do a career that is consciousness raising, meditation, teaching yoga, doing astrology, doing psychology, doing any career, you're a writer, write and lift people's consciousness. That fixes the problem.
Right,
okay?
Gotcha.
So that's career. Now also, Jupiter's aspected by Mars, which rules the house of healing. So I'd say, oh, you should go to healing. But not traditional healing, because it's a spiritual chart.
Right.
Children, well, I don't see a lot of children because Saturn is a planet of restriction. I have Saturn in the 5th house, and I have one child, and I had him very late in life. That's Saturn in the 5th house. It's restrictive on children.
You haven't said anything about relationship.
Relationship. Well, the same planet that rules the career rules the marriage house.
Oh.
And it's in the 12th. So that's not so good. But if you get a partner who's pursuing enlightenment, that is good. However, just like in the Western chart, you have that Venus square Mars that causes fighting.
Yes.
In the Hindu chart, it is seen by, well, in the Hindu chart, it so happens that Mars does aspect Venus. So that tells us fighting too. But the ruler of the marriage house is Jupiter. It's in the 12th, which is bad unless you get a spiritual partner. But still, even if you get a spiritual partner, it's aspected by Mars. So there's going to be fighting. Or you could get a partner who's a policeman, or who is in the military, or who does karate, or is an athlete. You got to get Mars in there in a positive way, otherwise it's going to be fighting.
Well, I've never been married, and I don't have any children. I have pets, though.
Right, right. And the sixth house is pets, and you have a strong sixth house.
And I have great relationships with my pets.
And then now the other thing is the moon. So in the Hindu chart, it's a lunar-based system. Then nobody says, what's your sun sign? They say, what's your lagna, which is the ascendant, and what's your rashi, which is the moon sign.
So different emphasis.
Yes. So the moon, the first thing I look for in a horoscope is what's the first house doing? Can the person have charisma, confidence, or are they weak and shy and introverted? And where's the moon? Wherever the moon is, the person's going to play out a great deal of their karma, even if the moon's afflicted. The moon is your feelings and your emotions. You know, it's really interesting because in the West, the sun sign is...
We've just got a few minutes, so I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
The sun in the West is so important. The moon is most important in the Hindu. Mm-hmm. Notice that the moon is seen at night.
Yes.
And a lot of times in the daytime you can see the moon. Mm-hmm. The sun is only in the daytime. Moon can be seen in the daytime and night. Anyway, your moon, so the moon is most important. Your moon is in the second house, which is money, knowledge, education. So with the moon in the second house, you're going to be a walking encyclopedia. You're going to want to know everything because it's in... Now, it could be that the moon's in the second and all you care about is money, but this is a spiritual chart. Being that it's with Ketu and a spiritual chart, you'll always want to be gaining information. And the most typical aspect of psychics and intuitives is the moon with Ketu, the moon with the south node, which you have, and you're massively psychic because I've experienced that from you.
Oh, that was very nice of you. Well, it's a real honor and a pleasure. It's so great to hear you do your work, and I know that many, many people would really benefit from getting a reading from you. How would people reach you, by the way?
They can go to jamesbraha.com, Braha is B-R-A-H-A, or they can email me at jamesbraha@gmail.com.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much. It's been a great honor to talk to you and a great privilege, and we're very grateful to our sponsors for making this happen. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.